We started our series on David back in January in the season of Epiphany. So we're going to kind of retrack here for a couple of Sundays between now and the beginning of Lent to talk about Epiphany and the meaning of Epiphany. I want you to see this word. It's a very, very powerful word, and it's an important word in our Christian lexicon. Here's the meaning of Epiphany out of the dictionary, and I'm going to give you one that's the way I think of it. A usually sudden manifestation or perception of the essential nature of something, an intuitive grasp of a reality, an illuminating discovery, realization, or disclosure, a revealing scene or moment. I also like to think of it in this way. It is a moment in which there is an unveiling of a deep and profound truth. Oftentimes, when we use the word epiphany as Christians, we're talking about a moment in which there is an unveiling of the presence of God or the power of God or the love of God. And so it stands right in the center of our Christian tradition in terms of how it is we know about God. We'll use the word revelation. It is a revelation of the presence or power of God. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at the early chapters of the Gospel of Mark and asking this question: who is Jesus in the Gospel of Mark? And we're going to be dealing with this theme of Epiphany. So let's read verses 4 through 11 of chapter 1. And I hope you'll go back and read maybe the first 2 or 3 chapters of Mark. Read the whole thing. It won't take you long, but I think you'll find it to be pretty powerful. John the Baptizer appeared in the wilderness proclaiming a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And people from the whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem were going out to him and were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sins. Now John was clothed with camel's hair. He came dressed as a prophet, with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. He proclaimed, "The one who is more powerful than I is coming after me. I am not worthy to stoop down and untie the thong of his sandals. I have baptized you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit." He's referring, of course, to Jesus. And in those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, this is Jesus, just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove upon him. And a voice came from heaven saying, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." This was a personal word to Jesus. It was an epiphany from God to Jesus about his own identity. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I don't know whether you enjoy mystery novels or those crime scene shows that we have on TV these days. My wife and I have both enjoyed reading mystery novels through the years, she more than I. And I got to thinking about this when I went back and read Mark here, the first chapter, asking the question, who is Jesus? How do we unlock the mystery of who Jesus is in the Gospel of Mark? So if you're used to reading mystery novels, you know that there are 2 different ways of solving a mystery or a crime. The first is the old-fashioned way. It's what I call the Columbo way. Peter Falk. You remember Peter Falk? You're not going to raise your hands because we'll know how old you are if you remember Peter Falk. But he was a TV detective, and he came in the great line of people like Sherlock Holmes, who solved mysteries the deductive way. For instance, if you think about one of those Sherlock Holmes mysteries, maybe there were a group of people at a dinner party on a ship or on a railroad car, and all of a sudden a body is found. And the deductive way of solving that problem would be to think through it rationally. Think about who all the potential suspects are, and then start eliminating them one by one. Which ones had ironclad alibis? They couldn't have been the one. And you narrow them down, and then you start thinking of putting together the clues. And if you were a Peter Falk Columbo fan, you knew that Peter Falk had this kind of play dumb way of asking questions, and he would elicit a lot more information than the person meant to tell him. And eventually they just kind of put it together in a rational way, and they would know who committed the crime. These days we're a lot more used to what I call the inductive way of solving the crime. That's CSI, crime scene investigation. I don't know when they started, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, but now it seems like there are more shows. All you have to do is turn on the television and you'll see somebody performing an autopsy. Have you noticed that? But this is the scientific way of solving a crime scene investigation. The scientists will go out to the place where the body was found, and they'll collect the fingerprints and the DNA evidence and all sorts of other kinds of evidence. They'll use blue lights and they'll, powder the places for the fingerprints. And then they'll bring the body back to the morgue and perform the autopsy. And pretty soon they build the case in an inductive way with all these facts that they have discovered. It'll be an ironclad case. I don't love CSI, but I have to tell you, my wife does. She has watched all of these CSI movies. Whenever I come into we have our kitchen and our den are, one great big room. And so I come in and the TV will be there and it'll be all red. Somebody performing an autopsy, blood and guts. Well, look, you laugh. But it can be disconcerting when you come in and your wife is cooking spaghetti and she's watching the autopsy. Well, that's the way that we answer questions, the deductive and an inductive method. When we open the Bible, we find a kind of mixture of that. When we look at the stories of Matthew and Luke, Luke especially kind of tries to tell us who Jesus is in the old inductive method. There are a lot of details. We talked about this back in December. We talked a lot about Luke, the first chapter. Luke tells us about the visitation of angels and about the announcing of Mary's pregnancy, also about the announcement of her cousin Elizabeth's pregnancy. We'll say a word about that here in a moment. Then we're told by Luke about the journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And we're given details about how they looked for a place to stay so that they could have this birth in a good place, but they ended up out there in the manger. And then there's details about the singing of angels and the opening of the sky and the shepherds arriving and the birth of a child. There are lots of details there. And Luke tells us that this was the birth of a child. It's the inductive method. It's powerful. In the end, it really doesn't convince, because in the final analysis, there's no body to exhume, no fingerprints to be had, no DNA evidence to be tested. It's still always a matter of faith, isn't it? Now, when we turn to Mark, which is the earliest and the shortest gospel, it's really interesting. Mark skips the Christmas narratives entirely. There's nothing in there about Bethlehem, about the manger, about the babies, about the angels visiting. Mark skips all of that and goes right to this story about Jesus and John the Baptist as young men. Right here in the first chapter, beginning with verse 4, we see them there. They come together. They're standing in the river Jordan, face to face, eyeball to eyeball. It is an extraordinary moment because these two men are cousins. John the Baptist talks about him. He never acknowledges the fact that he has known him all of his life. He talks about him as one who will come and save people spiritually rather than just through the water. But here we find them, and John literally baptizes his cousin Jesus. What an extraordinary moment that must have been for him. And the reason is simple. There's a footnote to this story, and again you find it in Luke chapter 1. We are told about Elizabeth, who was old and barren, who was visited by God and became pregnant with the man who would become John the Baptist. And then we're told about the angel who visits Mary, and Mary too becomes pregnant with Jesus. And then this wonderful story about how Mary goes and visits her cousin Elizabeth. And when she does, Elizabeth says, wow, something just happened to me the moment you walked in the door. This is how she puts it. Verse 44, the first chapter of Luke. As soon as I heard the sound of your greeting, the child in my womb leaped for joy. The child in my womb leaped for joy. John the Baptist in the womb leaped for joy when in the presence of Jesus in the womb. And now we see these two young men standing eyeball to eyeball in the River Jordan. And don't you know that John's heart is leaping for joy at being in the presence of his Lord one more time. It's an extraordinary story, an extraordinary moment. I don't know whether you've been to Israel and stood in the River Jordan. I have. It's a moving moment. And in this moment, as Jesus rises out of the water dripping from him, suddenly the skies open. And there is a private epiphany. And he hears these words, "You are my son. With you I am well pleased." And that is Mark's answer. That is Mark's answer about who is Jesus. You are my son with whom I am well pleased. But of course, if that's all there was, then it really might not make a whole lot of difference to you and me. Because ultimately, this story doesn't make any difference for you or me. It doesn't have any power in our lives unless we come to understand who Jesus is for us in our lives. What is the mystery? What is the power? What is the revelation of who Jesus is in our lives? And what I would say to you this morning is that it's important to look at this story from two different perspectives as we ourselves consider what it means. The first of these is to acknowledge the importance of mystery. The whole point of what we've been talking about is that we can try all we want to try to prove the existence of God or prove that Jesus is the Son of God. We live in a scientific age, don't we? I don't know about you, but I like reading a little bit. Not very much because I don't understand very much about it. But I like reading a bit about physics and astronomy and cosmology, the beginning of the universe, that spark that we say the universe was begun with, the Big Bang. And I think there are all sorts of people who, because we live in a scientific age, we think we can reach out there into space. We can reach back into time. We can look through a telescope and see billions of years ago. And somehow maybe we're going to catch a glimpse of God in that way. That we'll be able to do like CSI. We'll be able to have proof that there is a God. And it's really clear to me that that's never going to happen. That the one who created always lies outside of that which is created. There's no way for us to prove the existence of God. If that's your goal or aim in life, as it is for so many people, it will be a very, very frustrating journey. Ultimately, I've come to believe that ultimately we cannot speak accurately about God or about Jesus without using this word, mystery. Mystery. There is a mystery in the presence of God. There is a mystery in the presence of Jesus, the Son of God, that we must always embrace. Let me ask you this question. I've asked this question through the years of many, many people. Do you believe that there is more to life than meets the eye? Now, I want you to think about that for just a moment. Do you believe that there is more to life that meets the eye? And so let me just explain what I mean by that. Have you had moments in your life in which you sensed that there was something there that could not be explained? Maybe it was in a moment of great beauty, the rising of a sun. Maybe it took place in the midst of a powerful relationship. Maybe, and I suspect that almost everybody in this room has had this experience, there was a moment in which you sensed the presence of another human being that you could not say was physically present. And we've been taught in our scientific age to just ignore those kinds of events. Well, that's just kind of your mind playing tricks on you. Everybody has to kind of make up their own mind on this, but I don't think so. We have all had experiences in which we discovered that there is more to life than meets the eye. And the only way you can describe or understand those moments is with the word mystery. Or maybe the word God. The powerful presence of God in ways that we cannot fully understand. Then secondly, we have to say that who Jesus is to you or who Jesus is to me is always really, really personal. It's always a personal question. I have a friend who likes to ask this question. He will say, when was the first time you knew that you belonged to God? I mean, probably most of you are here today because at some point in your life, you just knew that you belonged to God. If not, maybe you're just searching. That's okay too. But here's this question. When was the first time you knew you belonged to God? You may have grown up in the way that I did. I grew up in a preacher's family. I do not ever remember not going to church, not going to Sunday school, not having conversation on a daily basis about God. When I was young, we would go on vacation. We would go visit my grandparents in Tennessee. I always loved visiting my grandparents in Tennessee. He owned a farm, but he was also a preacher. And Sunday morning would come around. I'd say, well, we're on vacation. We don't need to go to church and Sunday school today, do we? They say, yeah, we do. Well, it's just church, not Sunday school. No, we go to church and Sunday school, even on vacation. It was kind of disappointing to me. I wanted to say, look, I got it. I know we can take a day off now and then. Some of you were raised that way. You don't ever remember a time when you didn't have a sense that God was a reality in your life. Others of you can pinpoint the exact time, the same place. You know the GPS coordinate, where you were and what happened. Maybe it was that moment when you put down that drink for the last time and gave it to God, and God took you unto God's self. Maybe it was the time when you fell in love and you knew that this love was something more than just human love, that it came to you by the grace of God. Maybe it was a time of such utter pain or disappointment or grief that you found yourself on your knees, literally or symbolically, makes no difference. You found yourself on your knees, and it was there that God became real to you. Maybe it's not yet happened. So I want to finish by asking two more questions. When was the first time you knew you belonged to God? And here's the second question. When was the last time you knew you belonged to God? And as we prepare for the sermon next week, maybe you can be thinking about this question. When will be the next time that the heavens open and you hear the words, "You are my beloved child," and you find yourself there in the middle of the river, face to face with him? And you will know that you belong to God.